Hello everyone and welcome back to our look at Virgie's book, You Have the Right to Remain Fat. We are working on chapter 6 today, which is another 12 pages, so it's longer than a lot of the previous chapters we've looked at. I think it's about the same size as chapter 5, so we'll probably be looking at a longer video, depending on how many tangents I go off on, but I react without going over content beforehand, so I have no idea how deep into this I'm going to go, but enough delaying the inevitable. Let's just go ahead and start reading chapter 6 of Virgie's book. Bros and Thinness, Heteromasculinity and Whiteness. When I was still weight cycling, being thin represented a lot of things to me, but it especially represented access to straight men and heteronormativity, which I thought of as love. That desire came at a great price. I saw my body as the only commodity I had to trade for love. I did so many destructive things to my body because I think I truly wanted to destroy it, to destroy me. I exercised to the point of exhaustion. I refused to eat the things I loved. I was so anxious about gaining weight and eating that I made myself nauseous all the time. I was nauseous for almost 10 years straight. I was in years-long relationships with men who didn't care that I was unhappy and malnourished. I remember being 18 years old on a date with a 38-year-old secretly married salesman named Cameron. We had met on a phone personals service. He bore some resemblance to Mel Gibson circa Braveheart. Or maybe he just said that often enough about himself that I believed him. We were sitting at a booth in a steakhouse. He had ordered himself a ribeye and was enthusiastically chowing down. I remember trying so hard to be beautiful. I worked at Mervyn's that summer, and I used my paycheck and my employee discount to buy new clothes for our dates. That night I was wearing uncomfortably tight white cargo pants and a green shirt that I'd gotten in the teen section. It said double mint over my breasts. He told me he liked when I dressed like a teenager, and I wanted to please him. He liked to drive me around San Francisco and tell me about all the restaurants where the manager or the owner or the maitre d' knew him. I was from a small, insulated suburb and was genuinely impressed by his name-dropping. I had made a habit of trying to be unobtrusive by ordering a small plate or simply eating from my date's plate. I think that night I might have been feeling particularly excited because we were at a fancy restaurant in the financial district. I wanted to order my own plate rather than sit there watching him. I told him I wanted to order something. He stopped, knife and fork in hand, and sighed. "You're not going to eat it anyway," he said in a matter-of-fact tone verging on exasperation, and went back to eating. I felt so ashamed. It felt like there was a silent expectation that I would do whatever I had to do to remain my size, but preferably smaller. I was working so hard, and the meal, whether I was going to eat it or not, symbolized his recognition of this work. The meal represented the fulfillment of the reciprocal understanding of our respective gender roles. I had done my job as a woman not to eat, and I expected him to play his role and buy me a gift. I was further embarrassed because if he noticed that I never ate, then I was failing at hiding my dieting. The mask had slipped, and he had known all along that I was trying too hard to be pretty. My diet was an act of service, but it was understood that I would never make it seem like work, like the way a waitress must never seem like she isn't having a great time. Okay, so there's multiple things here that are not related to heteromasculinity or heteronormativity or whatever else she's trying to comment on here. She was 18 years old on a date with a 38-year-old man who said he liked it when she dressed as a teenager. To me, it seems like this guy was just fucking sketchy to begin with. This isn't a matter of dieting or whatever. This guy was sketch as fuck. This guy was taking... I'm 31 now. The idea of dating an 18-year-old is fucking baffling. Don't get me wrong, 18-year-olds aren't children, but they're still very young, especially for someone who's 30 fucking 8. 20-year difference. 20-year difference there. And that whole thing about feeling exasperated and that she wasn't going to eat anyway, this is twofold. One, I have no doubt that he was trying to exert control, but this was due to her age, not due to her weight. I think that she is misreading this instance of her life. There was a 20-year difference between you two. He should not have been dating you. The fact that he drove you around San Francisco and was pointing out all the different people that he knew at these different restaurants as a way to kind of boost himself up, he was a creep. He was a creep. And I also think that the other thing was, though, that if you weren't regularly eating in front of him, granted, he still should have bought you a plate. I'm not denying that, unless we're just going to set aside the creep factor for a moment. He still should have bought you a plate or something, but he's already proven to be a bit of a creep, so he was probably cheap as well, at least a little bit. And then on top of that, he had known you to not eat much, so I'm sure for him there was this, well, why don't you just eat off my plate like you always do? Still cheap, and still a major fucking creep. I'm actually just having a hard time getting past the age difference here and his behavior and saying that he liked when she dressed like a teenager. This was a predatory relationship, and you dieting or whatever was secondary to the age gap and the creep factor of this guy. Like, I'm having a hard time even commenting on her diet culture rhetoric in here, because to me it's so abundantly clear that this was a predatory male preying on someone who was 20 years his junior, barely an adult, and said that he liked when she dressed like a teenager. He was a creep. And I think anything about you eating or whatever was a matter of control due to your age, because he wanted to exert control over a younger woman, not a younger, and I don't know what weight she was here, I don't know what she looked like here, but I'm going to assume he found her very attractive, so he wanted to have control over an attractive young woman. That's where a lot of this came from. Not so much your weight, not so much you behaving in a heteronormative way or something that boosted his masculinity. Well, maybe a little bit of that, but it had far less to do with you eating and far more about the control over a younger person. This guy was a creep. And to me, this just goes to show how you focusing so much on diet culture makes you miss the other red flags. For me, hetero romance was as much of a fantastical story as dieting was. I wanted my life to follow particular plot points, and I thought that my weight was how I could control that narrative. Romance aside, it was important to recognize that misogyny and men play a major role in the maintenance of fat phobia. This was definitely a misogynistic man. I don't think it was a matter of your weight. I'm gonna double down hard on this, because it was a 38-year-old man repeatedly apparently equating himself with Mel Gibson from Braveheart, saying that he liked when his date dressed like a teenager, a date that was 20 years his junior. I'm sorry, it's just a little baffling to me how there isn't even a note really in here of the predatoriness of this interaction. Rather than recognizing the multiplicity of feminine expression and feminine power, regardless of sex assignment at birth, ability, size, the presence or absence of modesty or money, women in pursuit of thinness become complicit in their own dehumanization and therefore become agents of misogyny. Again, I do think there was a dehumanizing quality to this interaction. I don't think it was because of your weight. I think he was trying to control a young woman because he's a creep. A few years ago, I had dinner with one of my closest friends and a bunch of her friends. We sat at the big table in her dining room, passing plates of roasted root vegetables covered in goat cheese, pouring red wine, and covering a polite range of topics. I will tell you right now that I hate dinner parties with respectable people. I like dinner parties with my friends who frequently talk about anal sex and the last time someone had the nerve to be utterly basic in public. This particular group kept dinner conversation focused on safe topics: weather, recent travel, tasteful boasts of career success, and impending rituals like weddings, babies, and home ownership. I listened on with a mildly derisive anthropological interest. That is so condescending. That is so unbelievably condescending, and you talk about dehumanization, and yet it seems that you, to a degree, are dehumanizing these people by judging their choice of keeping things at on safe topics and life script rituals. Like, don't get me wrong, this doesn't sound like the closest friend group. This sounds like a friend group that maintains a level of surface relationship, don't get me wrong, and it certainly wouldn't interest me. You didn't have to go. You didn't really have to go. And I'm sorry, but I don't think there was an anthropological interest here. I think you were just bored. I think you were just bored and passing judgment. After dessert, people started to leave until there was just 3 of us left. Me, my close friend, and another woman. The third woman was stylish, smart, striking, and charming. She was funny and had amazingly shiny hair. Jokes quickly turned into real talk once we got a little drunker. She admitted to us that she was thinking of dropping out of her PhD program at an elite institution. She seemed really upset, really torn up about it. She loved her program, she told us. We asked her why in the world she would give up something she cared so much about. She told us that she really wanted a relationship and a family with a man, and that she had always had trouble because she was almost 6 feet tall. Now that she was nearing 30, she was starting to panic. She had tried to date, but found that the combination of her height and her level of education acted as a double whammy. She'd been on dates where men flat out told her that she was too much. She reflected to us sadly that although she couldn't change her height, she could change whether or not she had a PhD. It still makes me cry every time I think of her. I suspect that her story is not unique. Women strategically debase ourselves consistently because of desires for romance, especially in straight relationships. I think what made that evening unique was her willingness to talk about it. I don't know, this seems a little sketch to me, this story. I feel like there's something that isn't being included in this story that would also affect whether she dropped out of the PhD program or not. Getting a PhD is very difficult, and it is a long-term commitment. I mean, it takes years. And if she's nearing 30 and she hasn't been going on many dates and she really wants that life script of a husband and kids and stuff, I could see how that could also, it could just be a shifting of priorities for her. I don't know. I feel like there's something missing from this. I feel like Virgie clipped something because it didn't help her narrative. I asked her not to leave her program. I told her how much compassion I felt for her. I shared that I understood her story better than she could probably even imagine. We were both big women in different ways, who were trying to find meaningful connections with straight dudes in a deeply broken culture. I never saw her again, and I had no idea whether she left her program or not. I understand your story better than you could probably even imagine, because I'm a big girl, too. It's, again, Virgie's, like, weird narcissist tendencies. From what I've seen on Virgie, she's never gone for a PhD. She has a master's, but honestly, I'm really close to getting my master's, too. I know, I've heard plenty about the process of getting a PhD. I don't think that they're really comparable. But I don't think that was her point anyway. It's that just because they were both 2 bigger women who were trying to have, like, steady romantic relationships, that she therefore completely understands the other woman's predicament, but I don't really think she does. I sometimes regret that I didn't vehemently tell her that she was wrong about men, but I didn't because I knew she wasn't. We are taught that men are the key to happiness and fulfillment. We fear that without heterosexual marriage and childbearing, we cannot become people who matter or real adults. It is this nexus of desire and fear that is the breeding ground for self-destructive behavior like dieting. Rather than being taught that you deserve love simply because you are a person, you are taught that love is something people must earn through particular socially sanctioned methods. For many women, that method is weight control. Okay, real quick. To a degree, I understand what she's saying. That gatekeeping of real adulthood because you're not married. I've gotten that a little bit, especially since I am asexual, never had a boyfriend and stuff. It's like, to a certain degree, there's this not full-on infantilization, but it leads that way for me when I'm talking to people. It's not an often thing that happens, but something I do want to note is that this last sentence, rather than being taught that you deserve love simply because you are a person, you are taught that love is something you must earn through particular socially sanctioned methods. Real quick, so I do think that people deserve love. What she's conflating here is that there is just kind of a genuine love for humanity, and therefore you deserve that love as a person. And then romantic love, where you deserve someone's invested romantic and probably sexual interest. And I don't think you are inherently deserving of that. I think those socially sanctioned methods are a way of creating the field for that for yourself. I think that you are not owed someone's romantic or sexual interest, which is what I feel like she's getting at here. It's important to recognize that men become both the stand-ins for cultural approval and the enforcers of normativity, even though they themselves are also subject to the realities of our oppressive gender paradigm. It is often at their hands that women and girls learn that their emotional, professional, and romantic well-being depends on proximity to men. So, real quick, I think to a degree I understand this to a small degree, because I think that once you hit puberty, there is this period where, like, you constantly seek boys' approval. Typically, I didn't really go through that, but I know a lot of people that did, and I think that that's where that comes in. So emotional and romantic, I see. Professional, not so much anymore. But then again, I've been in, for career-wise, I've been in primarily female-dominated areas, so it's been less of an issue for me. Emotional, you have to take responsibility for that for yourself. If you're projecting it onto men, especially after, I'm going to say 21-ish, then it's time for you to just start taking responsibility. Ideally, you would do that earlier. Ideally, your parents would teach you that your emotional well-being relies on you and you protecting yourself and all that, but whatever. As for romantic well-being, if you're straight, it does kind of rely on men, doesn't it? I mean, I'm not trying to be rude or problematic or anything. This is a genuine question I have. If you're gay, then no, it doesn't. If you're bi, it doesn't have to necessarily. And as a asexual person, no, I've never given a fuck. But I mean, just I don't even necessarily have a full-on point to go with this. These are just some observations that I have with it. So anyway, moving on. Misogyny manifests differently depending on how your body is positioned in the sexist schema. Let me be clear. All women are subjugated. Thin women get dehumanized just as fat women do, but it often looks different. Very thin women are positioned in far more public positions as wives and girlfriends, while fat women are positioned in far more private positions as lovers and secrets. Seen plenty of fat wives and fat girlfriends. And honestly, just from hearing some of Virgie's sexual exploits, I think part of her opinions on this are very colored by her very poor taste in men. Even among fat-bodied women, there are variations in treatment based on behavior and social status. A fat woman who is cisgender is likely to be treated differently than a fat woman who is trans, because both fat women and trans women are acutely marginalized. Relationships with fat or trans women are often hidden from the public. Fat trans women experience the violence that exists at the nexus of sexism, fatphobia, and transphobia. Race is another mitigating factor. The lighter you are, the more culturally valued you are. So whiteness or light skin can soften fat negative bias, whereas dark-skinned women may experience increased hostility due to the combined effects of colorism and fatphobia. Fat women who are willing to accept their cultural position as inferior get treated differently than fat women who are politicized. For example, I have been fat my entire life, but my fatness was less a source of anxiety before I was a fat feminist. Before I was a fat feminist, I was willing to do more work to compensate for my lower social standing. I performed more sexual labor, I did not set boundaries, I apologized frequently for my weight, and accepted blame when my partners and others criticized my body. Once I knew how to advocate for myself and set limits, dating became significantly more challenging, even though I was a fat woman both before my introduction to feminism and after. What we must realize is that it's not thinness that is being eroticized. What is being eroticized is the submission thinness represents in our culture. Thinness is a secondary characteristic. The true commodity is the willingness of women to acquiesce to cultural control. I disagree. I think there's something visually more appealing about thinner people in general. Like, it's not just women. Thinner men tend to get more attention, especially if they also do, like, weightlifting, like lifting weights and building themselves up physically. Than that's like, there's the kind of gym bro kind of dudes, thin guys, and then like the dad bod, and then bigger men. I think would be, if you had to go for a hierarchy, that would be a rough hierarchy of generally physical attractiveness. I think it goes both ways. I think to a certain extent it's innate. I don't think it's made up. I don't think that we're taught that thin bodies and buff male bodies are the beauty ideal. I think that the beauty ideal exists because of a general overarching preference. Because in general they tend to be a bit healthier, which would make them more suitable for reproduction. And I'm sorry to go down that road, but I do think that plays a role. And that's why there's also variation between tastes, is that there's a difference. It's not a single, this is the ideal, this is best. People have a kind of a range of tastes. And while the general overarching preference is someone of a healthier body weight, there's plenty of people that also find bigger women desirable. So I don't think that it's necessarily a matter of cultural control. I think that there is a natural component to finding thinner people, healthier looking people attractive. Controlling women's body size is about controlling women's lives. This claim to control is based on fantasies of masculine superiority bolstered by the culture. The control does not just apply to thinness. Fatness and thinness mean different things in different places. Right now, as you are reading this book, there are places in our world where women are being ritualistically fattened in order to become more romantically competitive. I could be pronouncing the next few country names wrong. Please know I tried my best. In parts of Mauritania and Niger, fat rolls and stretch marks are considered the height of feminine beauty. Just as women in the West undertake uncomfortable and sometimes harmful methods to become ever thinner, these women are at times force-fed to consume dangerous weight-gaining medications designed for animals in order to fit a radically different, though equally damaging, beauty ideal. I read about European and American anthropologists in Mauritania, who couldn't believe the first time they witnessed women in these areas getting weighed at the clinic. They put more clothes on before getting on the scale so they would be heavier, rather than removing clothes the way women almost reflexively do in the West. The years I spent being taught fat phobia by my peers growing up and then by media destroyed my sense of self. By the time the boys at school were through teaching me that my greatest accomplishment in life would be to lose enough weight to date one of them, I had no idea what I actually needed or wanted. All that was left in the wake of my dazzling and silly personality was a desire to never feel like an outsider again. Okay, something real quick to note. You notice that you said you don't want to feel like an outsider, not that you don't want to be fat. That all of these experiences led up to you not wanting to be an outsider. I think that is a fairly universal experience among adolescents and teenagers. I felt that way too, but it had nothing to do with my weight. I felt like an outsider for a variety of reasons. I felt like an outsider because I was socially awkward. I felt like an outsider because I didn't have typical interests, at least for the group of kids that I had access to. I liked card games and Yu-Gi-Oh! Most of the kids my age did not. And those that did, very few of them were girls, which meant that my own peer group, I lacked some same-gender social connections as a teenager, which was really hard on me because I really wanted friends in that realm, but I hated makeup, which is what the majority of girls my age were interested in. And this isn't a not like other girls sort of thing. It's just a matter of I didn't know how to fit in by being myself. And so I ended up kind of acting as though I was interested in makeup and fashion and shit that I wasn't really interested in. And so I never found those relationships fulfilling. And when I didn't line up with those ideals, yes, I got poked fun at. Yes, I got that feeling of being an outsider. I think that happens to a lot of people for a variety of reasons. I think even someone who is using Virgie's concept of what would be most culturally ideal, I think a girl that dresses well, is thin, is white, is blonde, is the most feminine ever could still feel like an outsider for a variety of reasons, potentially just because her peers were jealous of her and treated her as less than. So I think that feeling of being an outsider, by and large, is fairly universal for teenagers and adolescents. Being weird and bossy and theatrical and curious had always been the best things about me. But those qualities attracted attention, and attention was emotionally dangerous. All that was left was a traumatized, approval-seeking girl with no sense of her own magic. It was disproportionately at the hands of boys my age that I was taught that I was worthless. The justification was that they didn't find me desirable, and this was a punishable offense to them. So, I don't think so. I think, because you even said that you were weird, bossy, and theatrical. Things that would draw attention to you, regardless of your weight, and would likely make you a target for teasing. I was weird and a bit bossy myself. I don't think I was necessarily theatrical, but that was enough to make me excluded from my group too. I think part of it was that perhaps you didn't know how to modify your behavior a little bit to fit better into social situations. Even the most typical of anyone that would do well in a social situation will fail if they do not follow certain social conventions to protect the comfort of the overall group. This is not something that we innately recognize all the time. There are some people that do recognize it, and they are fantastic socializers, and it's more automatic, I think, for them. I don't know, I'm not convinced that this was solely because of your weight the way you think it was. I think there were aspects of your personality that stood out, and kids being kids attacked those that are different, you and others. Paradoxically, I didn't fight back because I thought their behavior was my fault. I was convinced that I could control their behavior and make it all better if I just tried harder to become their idea of beautiful. What they were attempting to teach me were the lessons that many girls and women before me have been taught. Men and boys are allowed to teach women and girls about compliance with social expectations of desirability without our consent. Men and boys are allowed to use systems of sexual and emotional approval and disapproval to confirm masculine superiority and ideologies of control, offering sexual and romantic attention to women and girls whose bodies conform to the social standards of beauty while socially isolating and punishing those whose bodies do not. Both behaviors are based on dehumanization. I think this is an oversimplification of how dynamics work, and your big piece of evidence for this seems more to be based on adolescent interactions in a school, which is not a good representation given that everyone is severely underdeveloped. They will not have reached the full growth of their brain until about age 25. If you are looking at 15, that's 10 years of growth that has not happened yet. So therefore, I do not think that it is necessarily fair to say that this is a issue and that these boys believe all these things and it will remain this way. People do change in 10 years. There's a lot to happen between the ages of 15 and 25 when their brain becomes fully formed and they become more compassionate. Recognition of compassion towards others and recognition of how your behaviors and your attitudes and your words affect other people is one of the last things to fully form in the brain. That ability to see to predict how your actions and your words will be perceived and reacted to is one of the last things to develop in the brain. And so I don't think that these boys necessarily had any particular intent behind their teasing of you. I think you were different, and so they targeted that and didn't really think much about it. Maybe some of them had ill intent, because there are assholes in every group that will remain assholes till the day they die. But I don't think your entire experience was based on these boys trying to get you to conform to some social beauty standard. I think you were different, physically and personality-wise, and they reacted to that because you were different. Kids attack those that are different. These behaviors create an intense sense of dependency on masculine approval, which is gauged exclusively through sexual and romantic interest. This leads to the low self-worth that facilitates things like disordered eating and rape culture. Misogyny works in tandem with white supremacy to build a population of women that is pliant and easily manipulated in order to carry out the oppressive needs of the culture and the state as they currently exist. It's important to recognize that the desire to be thin is actually part of a drive to be compliant with current Western expectations of feminine submission and second-class citizenship. I disagree. Oh, it's shit like this that actually pisses me off. It's saying that I can't desire to be thin, because for her, I'm sure thin would be what would be considered a healthy weight in the BMI. I desire to be a healthy weight in the BMI. I desire to be thinner. I desire to be thin. That is not because I want to be compliant with ideas of feminine submission and second-class citizenship. It's because I want to be healthier. And I think that you projecting that there are no other reasons, it has to be this, is where you lose a lot of people. And it's where your claims seem fucking ridiculous. As Patricia Hill Collins, Audre Lorde, and Bell Hooks have all pointed out, white femininity has historically played a colluding role in the maintenance of white supremacy and heteropatriarchy, acting as a sort of wedge of intermediary third party that solidifies the power broker between white men of influence and everyone else. This agreement has cost white women full citizenship, but it is through the promise of second-class citizenship that they are invested in maintaining the current gender-race paradigm. I want to end this section with a sobering observation. When I work with women who want to stop dieting, we will often make a lot of emotional progress until we get to romance. The women who envision spending their lives with men or who are partnered with fat negative people are much more likely to return to dieting. The women who either have a fat positive partner or who are queer are less likely. This is not to say that there are no straight women with incredible fat positive partners or that there are no queers who experience fat phobia in their relationships. This observation is anecdotal, but it's telling. No single feminist can fix the legacy of misogyny that continues to cycle through and destroy our lives. What I can tell you is that you are not alone in your stultifying disappointment or occasional, constant sense of hopelessness, and that you don't have to acquiesce to the sexist forces that seek to make you small, both metaphorically and literally. This is where a lot of the fat liberation, fat acceptance people try to make everything about this sense of control and about toxic cultural norms. And the issue is that there's no real nuance here. She likes it to act like there is, but there isn't, because you're making these overall claims that if you want to be thin, then it must be because you're trying to adhere to Western expectations. You are trying to be thin, then you must be trying to subjugate yourself to men. And I think that that's a very toxic mindset to have, and I don't think that that's particularly helpful. I don't think that getting bigger is a stance against the patriarchy in any way. This just seems very much like, again, like she's trying to position herself in a victim role through cultural norms. But I'm going to leave it here, and I want to hear your opinions in the comments down below. What do you think of this? Quick updates for me. I weighed myself, I'm 185. The fact that I was able to pretty much maintain my weight after last week of not doing well made me very happy. So I'm still at 185. Kind of feel a little stuck here, and I'm getting a little annoyed, but I'm going to just like get back on track and follow it well and pay attention to what I'm eating. Eventually the weight will come off, right? As for anime, manga, I've continued reading Snow White with the Red Hair, and I'm finally into a section that was not featured in the anime, and it looks pretty good, I gotta say. And I'm loving the dynamic between Shirayuki, Ryu, and Obi. I love that, and we get to see a little bit more of Princess Izana and his interactions with Shirayuki. So all fun stuff. I'm excited. I've also watched a little bit more of Noragami. I'm about halfway through the anime. Now, it feels kind of slow. I understand why someone recommended this to me. There are definitely parallels between this and Kami-sama Kiss. I'm not as thrilled with Yato as I was with Tomoe. I don't want to make any judgments until I've seen the rest of the anime, but I'm not as fond of the characters as a whole as I was in Kami-sama Kiss. I don't know if I'll read the manga of this. I'll definitely finish the anime, but I don't know if I'll read the manga. And I finished my literature review, at least the draft of my literature review. Now I have to wait for my professor to give me some feedback so I can fix anything. There are some issues with flow that I can already see, but I don't want to get into it until I get feedback from them, because oftentimes what I think are issues are not considered issues by other people, and things that I thought were fine are actually issues. So I want to see what they say. And I think that's about it. So I'm going to leave it here. Thank you for watching, and I will see you next time.